and welcome to the Art of Being Human. I thought today I would start talking to you about caffeine and then move on to marijuana. But caffeine is something that a lot of people use, and it's not going to hurt you, it's not going to kill you if you have a cup of coffee or anything like that. So I'm not really the bearer of bad news here, but 80% to 90% of people use caffeine. They drink it in coffee, they drink it in tea, they drink it in cola, different kinds of sodas. You can get it in chocolate. It can be almost in everything that you drink or what you eat. You need to be careful though when you're dealing with decaffeinated things. I was telling my sister about it the other day. She's on a special diet. If you're going to use decaffeinated things, be careful how they decaffeinate, because some of the coffees and teas are decaffeinated by using hydrochloric acid. And I don't know how much of it gets into your system, so I would have a concern about that. But there are other ways of decaffeinating it using much less problems, like even bubbling water. So if you're going to drink decaffeinated, it might be healthy for you to find out how they decaffeinated it before you buy it, because there are different ways of doing it. So caffeine, 80 to 90% use it. I have read different things about how much is in an average cup of coffee, but some sources say 100 milligrams of caffeine in a cup of coffee. Others say 200 milligrams of caffeine in a cup of coffee. But it can lead to physical dependence. How many people get up in the morning and they can't move hardly until they've had 2 or 3 cups of coffee? But there's a lot of things about coffee that's healthy for you. And I've heard about it helping heart disease. It helps you recover, and there's all kinds of things about coffee. But it leads to physical dependence, and 40 to 70% have withdrawal symptoms if they stop drinking anything that has caffeine in them. Now I want to mention energy drinks. Energy drinks contain caffeine, a lot of it, and vitamin B. It's a caffeine vitamin B combination. And I can remember going to a store and looking at these 5-hour energy drinks. I wasn't going to buy it, but I was just looking at it. I wanted to see what was in it. And a salesperson came up to me and said, "Don't buy it." And I looked at him. Seldom do you have a salesperson say not to buy something. He says, "Don't buy it." He says, "What it's going to do to your heart is going to be so bad. You're going to get so revved up on that it's going to be damaging to the heart. I don't think a person like you should have it." And I appreciated his honesty, because caffeine can make you agitated. It can make you very nervous. It doesn't just give you energy. It doesn't just wake you up. You can be quite jittery with it if you get too much. I know some students drink coffee and they take no-dose. No-dose has got a lot of caffeine in it, and it's for the purpose of staying awake, so that you can complete your studies. If you're going to have a test the next day, stay up all night, well, then you need no dose. I tried it out of curiosity once when I was in college. I just wanted to see if it would do anything for me or if it would keep me awake. Nothing. When I drink caffeine, there's no response. It has no effect on me whatsoever. So all these people that are drinking all their cups of coffee so they can stay awake because they're tired and they have to stay awake for some reason, they're drinking all this coffee. I could drink it until the cows come home, and I wouldn't have any effect on it at all. Coffee sometimes, however, can also be used as a diuretic. But the idea is the caffeine stimulates you, gets you awake, keeps you going, and if you're sensitive to it, it can do other things, the agitation, the nervousness, and so forth. So 40 to 70% of people do have withdrawal symptoms when they stop it, and it's important that you not get too much caffeine. I don't have a whole lot to say about it, but you can get powdered caffeine, and that's very dangerous to use powdered caffeine. Powdered caffeine is a white powder, and you can use it, you can dump it into a drink. The only thing is the normal dose of powdered caffeine should be 1/16 of a teaspoon. And I brought in a prop here. The end of this eraser over here somewhere I may as well give up. The end of this eraser, you can see it on top. That's the amount of powdered caffeine that's considered to be in a normal dose. Just that, the end of the eraser on a pencil, 1/16 of a teaspoon. Let me hold it to one side. It might be a little bit easier to see.
This camera over here. Yep.
Okay. Just a little bit, just a tiny bit. Over that amount, you're in trouble because it has an effect on you. And students and kids, teenagers, have been known to die because they've had too much powdered caffeine. And they mention in the show that I saw this morning, if you take a couple of tablespoons, it will kill you. It's that bad. So various people are trying to get it banned so that they can't sell it at all. Because when a child uses it, they use it to get more energy or whatever it is they use it for, but they don't realize that all they need is that little tiny bit. And if they take more than that, they're in trouble. It will be poisonous and they will die. And students and teenagers have died by just taking 2 or 3 teaspoons. If you take 1 teaspoon of it, then it's like drinking 28 cups of coffee at one time. That's just 1 teaspoon of it. If you take 1 or 2 teaspoons of it, 2 teaspoons, it's like drinking 57 cups of coffee at a time. No one would sit down and drink 57 cups of coffee at a time, just going from 1 cup to the next cup to the next cup. But if they just have a couple of teaspoons of it, that's the amount of caffeine that they get. And it can be a killer. So I mention caffeine not because it's going to hurt you if you use it in a normal way. If you drink a couple cups of coffee, that's not going to do anything. But if you take it in a concentrated form, to add to the effects of it, to help keep you awake if you're driving and you don't want to go to sleep at the wheel or whatever reason you have, you may end up dead. It's really very dangerous, so people are trying to stop it. So 2 tablespoons will kill. It acts as a poison. Now, what you get for symptoms, if you're overdosing on caffeine, you will get nausea, vomiting, seizures, and death. That's it. And normally just a cup of coffee wouldn't do anything to you at all, except maybe it would make you feel more awake. But caffeine is a stimulant drug. It actually is. So that's about all I wanted to say about caffeine. A lot of people use it, and they use it very safely. There are some people that believe you shouldn't use it at all, but it's hard to find something that it's not already in. Almost everything you eat, if it's sweet, if it's chocolate, if it's something that you drink, if it's soda, it all has caffeine in it. So you just need to watch how much you're actually getting. Now I want to do a section here on marijuana. Marijuana comes from the cannabis plant. And it has a main ingredient, THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, is the main ingredient in it. And it's the most commonly used drug after alcohol. Hashish is a more stronger version of it. And what they use the flowers, they use stems, and the leaves of the marijuana plant, of the cannabis plant, in order to get marijuana. Now, the effects of marijuana on you depend upon how much that you've taken. But here are some of the effects. It depresses the brain. You know, I've talked about heroin shrinking the brain. Well, marijuana isn't going to shrink the brain, but it's going to depress its function. It's not going to be able to function normally. You're not going to be able to think clearly. So it depresses the brain function. It lowers inhibition. It causes dependence and tolerance. It gives tachycardia. Tachycardia is a rapid heartbeat. The heartbeat is not stable. You may get fast beats, you may get slow beats, you may just beat all over the place in different tempos and in different amounts and different speeds, but it is an unstable heart beating. It gives decreased blood pressure. It gives more tar in the lungs than what cigarettes do. It will obstruct the airway, and so therefore your voice can get very hoarse. It contains carcinogens, which cause cancer. It changes memory and learning, and your time and your distance is impaired. I don't know if this, and you have tremors and rigid muscle movements. Now, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but sometimes if you're taking a prescription drug, and you're not, it's hard to tolerate. For some reason, your body doesn't tolerate it well. One of the things that is going to happen is that you'll have a distance and time distortion, and you get that in marijuana. For the time distortion, time is longer than what you think it should be. You look at the clock and it's 3 o'clock. It seems like forever. It seems like hours. And you look at the clock again and it's only 10 minutes after. You've distorted the perception of time, and it seems to elongate. It seems like forever before you can get another 5 minutes passed or another 5 minutes passed. I mention that because some prescription drugs, if you're sensitive to it, will do the same thing. But marijuana does that. Your sense of time is very distorted, and distance perception is distorted. If you are sensitive to a drug, say a prescription drug, that when you think in terms of distance, when you look in terms of distance, it's fuzzy. You know, you don't have a good distance perception. It seems like the distance is unclear, but if you're looking at something close, it doesn't seem so bad, but if you're looking at the distance, things seem unclear, kind of wavy, kind of not stable. And that's the effect of the drug. Well, marijuana does both, the time distortion and the space distortion. It gives tremors, it gives rigid movements of your body. It will give you panic if you have too much of it. And as I said, part of this depends upon how much that you're using. But you can get panic attacks. You can become psychotic. If you use that much, you can get really psychotic. When psychosis means that you're not in contact with reality, you can have hallucinations, you can have delusions that can go along with marijuana. So for people who think that marijuana is safe, it is not safe. You can have poor motor coordination, anxiety, euphoria, and a sensation of slowed time, which is what I just described to you in terms of the time distortion, impaired judgment, and impaired motor skills. Now, I've heard so many people say, well, it's safer to take marijuana than it is to take alcohol. If you're going to drive, you're safer taking marijuana than alcohol. You really shouldn't be taking anything if you're driving. But the senses are distorted enough that it does not make you a safe driver. Here are the problems with driving if you're using marijuana. The brain works slower. You don't think as fast. You can't react as fast to emergencies. You become very, very introverted. Now, by that, I mean you think about yourself, you think about your sensations. You're almost not in contact with the world around you. You are so into yourself and how you're feeling and what you're seeing and how the differences are between when you're using marijuana and not. You're just concentrating on yourself so much that you're not really in contact with the world around you. You're introverted, you're less in tune with your surroundings. As I said before, it dulls your senses, it impairs your sense of reality. I've talked to one student who thought when he was driving his car that he was floating down the street. He would turn it at the appropriate time, but he was floating. He did not have a sense that his wheels were on the road. He just thought he was like above the road, just floating. Now, I can't see how any of these symptoms can make a person a safe driver. And if you're going to compare alcoholism with marijuana, well, it's really not a comparison. It's not a fair comparison. It's saying, okay, let's compare fruit with beef, which is better. Well, you're talking about two different things. You know, if you say, well, do you like apples better than oranges, at least you're talking about fruit. But if you're saying, I would like to compare fruit with beef or spaghetti with beef, then what are you going to do? You can't really compare the two. So to say that alcohol is not safe and marijuana is safe, that's a misnomer. That's just not true. If you're driving and you're having any of these sensations at all, it will not make you a safe driver. And I don't want to be driving on one direction in the road and have somebody facing me who thinks they're floating. You know, it's just not safe. So it impairs you. It impairs your reality. Now, you're not going to act drunk, but some people laugh and they get silly and all of that. But you're not going to be acting so drunk, but it does affect you. Now, there are medical effects of marijuana, and the medical effects of marijuana, which are helpful. It relieves nausea from chemotherapy and vomiting. It relieves that from chemotherapy. It will stop seizures, and it helps pain. I was watching a news show in which this little boy was having seizures all day long. He had a very unusual seizure disorder, and there was no stopping it. They could not stop the seizures, but marijuana would stop the seizures. Now, I knew at the time, as soon as marijuana was approved for medical use, and it has been in some places approved for medical use, it would be just a hop, skip, and jump before it started to be approved for recreational use. I don't think recreational use is safe. I've heard that if people are using marijuana because they have a prescription for it, that they don't get high off from it. The marijuana does what it's supposed to do medically, but they don't get high off from it. But I knew as soon as you have medical marijuana, it would start being approved for recreational use. And the reason would be supposedly that it's safer than alcohol, and it's not. If you take enough, it's not safer than alcohol, but alcohol is not safe either. I saw a lady who was trying to get people to realize that marijuana needed to be legalized. And she said, she was a cancer patient, so I felt sorry for her. But she says, if I don't get marijuana, I'm going to die. And she said it over and over again in this news broadcast. I must have marijuana. If I don't have marijuana, I will die. And she made it very dramatic. She did it very dramatically, thinking that this is urgent, she's got to have it now, or she's going to pass on. But I have to take issue here. Marijuana is not necessary for life. If you said, I've got to have air or I won't survive, that would be true. If you said, I have to have food or I won't survive, that's true. If I don't have water, if I don't have food, if I don't have anything like certain medications save lives, and I know all of that. But to say that you're going to die without marijuana, there's no need. Your body does not need marijuana. Now, you may get very dependent on it once you start taking it, but it's not a need for the body, and you're not going to die if you don't have it. You're not going to die of something that you don't need to have to begin with. So I think I'm concerned about the marijuana use. It's not a narcotic in the sense that we use a hard narcotic. It's not a hallucination, a hallucinogenic drug, but if you have enough, you can have hallucinations if you take too much. It is a gateway drug, and it encourages people to take harder drugs. Now, I've heard also that people who are trying to get off from harder drugs, especially heroin, will turn to marijuana to try to get off heroin. And usually what happens is you use heroin and you use marijuana and then you get on a harder drug. I think we're using so many drugs, we have to be very careful. If you're a person and you're on medication, that's legitimate. If you need your meds, you need your meds. Where would we be without insulin? Where would we be without heart medication? Where would we be about that? But if you start to self-medicate, you're taking these drugs, the street drugs basically, because you feel better on them. You don't know what you're doing to your system, and if you're driving, you don't know how your driving is affected. If you think you're floating as you're going down the road, you shouldn't be driving. You may think that you're perfectly normal. You may feel, as far as you're concerned, perfectly normal, but you're not in touch with what's going on around you, which makes you an unsafe driver anyway. So I have questions about the recreational use of drugs. I'm not a fan. And if it works medicinally and it can be controlled, and so people who need it and they get help with it and it doesn't spread to everybody else, well, that's another issue. But to do it, just to do it recreationally, just like the caffeine, just like everything else, you can really overdose and you can really get yourself hurt, injured, you can even die from it. So it's something, and you have to watch kids because they're curious and they try things out of curiosity just to experiment, not knowing what it's going to do to them and not knowing what it's going to do to their physical system. You have to remember that children's brains are not developed, and if there's going to be any injury, any hurt, then if it's going to hurt the brain, what happens to the brain if it's being injured and it's not even finished growing yet? So you are hurting a young, undeveloped brain that's in the process of growing. So these are things you have to face, and these are things that you have to deal with. And I'm going to close it here because I'm almost out of time. Next time we'll be going into alcoholism. So I'll close it here. Please join me next time.